80 years in the crushing darkness of the abyss 5 kilometers down, yet she looks like she could still launch a squadron today. This is the USS Hornet, the most remarkably preserved shipwreck of the Pacific War, and a ghost that refuses to fade. In the annals of American naval history, few names carry the weight of CV-8. The USS Hornet wasn't just a ship. She was the platform for the Doolittle Raid, the daring mission that brought the fire of World War II back to Tokyo's doorstep and gave a grieving nation its first taste of hope. But in October 1942, at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, her luck ran out. She took an incredible, almost surgical amount of pounding torpedoes, dive bombers, and even kamikazes before finally slipping beneath the waves. For decades, she was a legend lost to the deep. That changed in January 2019, when the crew of the RV Petrel sent their cameras down 1,700 feet deeper than almost any other famous wreck. They didn't find a twisted pile of scrap metal. They found a time capsule. From the camouflage paint still clinging to her hull to the 20mm cannons still pointed at the sky. The Hornet's state of preservation is, quite frankly, impossible. Today, we're going inside the wreck to see what 80 years at the bottom of the world looks like and why this Doolittle Raider is still standing watch in the silent deep. Finding the Hornet wasn't just a matter of looking where she sank. It was a grueling exercise in historical forensic work. Unlike ships that go down in the heat of a sudden explosion, the Hornet was a lingering casualty of war. After being ravaged by Japanese aircraft, she was abandoned, then towed, then cast adrift, and finally shelled and torpedoed by both American and Japanese forces to ensure she didn't fall into enemy hands. This meant the ocean currents and the winds of 1942 had a significant say in where she finally rested. She wasn't a stationary target. She was a wandering ghost drifting silently through the smoke and chaos of the Santa Cruz Islands before disappearing forever. To solve this puzzle, the expedition team aboard the RV Petrel, operated by Vulcan Inc., had to look beyond the Hornet herself. They meticulously pored over the declassified deck logs and action reports of 9 different warships that were in her vicinity on that fateful October day. This was a massive data mining operation, cross-referencing sightings and navigational data from destroyers like the USS Mustin and USS Anderson. Every recorded bearing, every estimated drift speed, and every sighting of smoke on the horizon was a piece of a 77-year-old jigsaw puzzle. They were trying to reconstruct the final hours of a ship that refused to go down, plotting a general search area across a vast, featureless expanse of the South Pacific. The environment they were entering was nothing short of alien. At 17,500 feet, you are entering the abyssal plain. Here, the water pressure is an unimaginable 8,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a standard submarine like a soda can. It is a world of perpetual midnight, where the temperature hovers just above freezing, and the weight of the entire ocean presses down on everything. For most, this would be an impenetrable fortress. But for the veteran shipwreck hunters of the Petrel equipped with state-of-the-art autonomous underwater vehicles and remotely operated vehicles, it was a challenge they were born to meet. What happened next can only be described as a miracle of modern exploration. Despite the immense search grid and a depth that makes the Titanic's wreck look shallow by comparison, the team found her on the very first dive. It is almost unheard of in the world of deep-sea archaeology to strike gold so quickly. As the sonar images began to resolve on the high-definition screens in the Petrel's control room, a massive, unmistakable silhouette emerged from the silt. The Hornet had been found. The image that greeted them was haunting and spectacular. The sonar showed that the ship had impacted the seabed with such force that she left a visible skid mark in the mud before coming to a final halt. Seeing that 825-foot hull resting on the bottom after nearly 8 decades of silence was a profound moment for the crew. It wasn't just a technical discovery. It was a homecoming. The Hornet was no longer a lost legend. She was a physical reality standing ready to tell the story of her final violent hours. This successful hunt was a testament to the tireless dedication of researchers who refused to let this pivotal piece of history remain forgotten in the dark. As the sonar data began to resolve into high-definition clarity on the screens of the RV Petrel, the researchers were struck by a revelation that defied the typical carnage of naval shipwrecks. The secret to the Hornet's hauntingly pristine condition lies in a combination of how she died and how she finally landed in the absolute stillness of the abyssal plain. To understand the Hornet, you have to compare her to her contemporaries, specifically the USS Lexington. While the Lady Lex was essentially torn into 3 massive pieces by catastrophic internal gasoline vapor explosions that gutted her from the inside out, the Hornet tells a different story. She wasn't destroyed by her own heart. She was slowly, methodically beaten down by an external force of nature and steel. The structural analysis provided by the sonar images reveals a main hull section that is approximately 672 feet long. Given that the Hornet measured 825 feet when she was commissioned, it's clear that she is missing about 150 feet of her stern. This aft section weakened by a staggering number of Japanese and American torpedoes, including the final scuttling charges likely snapped off during the violent descent through 3 miles of water or upon the massive impact with the seabed. Today, that stern section rests about a nautical mile away, leaving the main body of the ship standing as a colossal, upright monument. The fact that the island, the flight deck, and the majority of the hull remain as a single unit is a testament to the rugged construction of the Yorktown-class carriers. But the most fascinating factor in her preservation is what we might call her protective tomb. The sonar images show a distinct impact crater and a visible skid mark where the Hornet hit the bottom and slid before coming to a rest. In this violent arrival, she buried herself incredibly deep into the soft, ancient silt of the ocean floor. In some places, the mud reaches all the way up to her hangar deck. While this is an archaeological shame, because it hides the specific torpedo damage beneath the waterline, it is a miracle for preservation. This thick layer of silt acts as a natural anaerobic seal, shielding the steel from the corrosive effects of oxygen-rich currents and freezing the lower half of the ship in the exact state it was in October 1942. Furthermore, the Hornet escaped the death by fire that claimed so many other carriers. Because she had been abandoned and her fuel lines drained or secured before she finally sank, she didn't suffer the massive internal fires that usually melt aluminum structures or warp steel bulkheads during a sinking. Instead, she descended as a cold, heavy weight into a world of perpetual midnight. At 17th to 500 feet, the water is near freezing and almost devoid of the biological organisms that typically consume wood and organic materials. This combination of structural integrity, a lack of internal explosions, and a deep burial in protective mud has turned the Hornet into perhaps the most well-preserved major combatant of the Pacific War. She didn't just sink. She was entombed, waiting for the lights of the RV Petrel to finally reveal her scars and her strength to a world that had almost forgotten where she lay. When the cameras of the ROV finally brought the Hornet into focus, the world was treated to a visual miracle that defied every expectation of deep-sea decay. Most wrecks at these depths are ghostly monochromatic skeletons stripped of their identity by time and tide. But as the lights pierced the eternal midnight of the abyssal plain, they revealed a ship that appeared to be holding its breath. The first thing that hits you is the color. The Hornet still wears her war paint. The blue and gray camouflage of the Measure 12 scheme is vividly visible along the length of her hull. Even more breathtaking is the giant white number 8 painted on her island. It remains perfectly legible, standing out against the steel as a defiant mark of her identity, as if the ship were merely waiting for her next squadron to return rather than resting at the bottom of the world for nearly 80 years. This level of preservation extends to the very teeth of the ship. The Hornet went down in one of the most brutal air-sea battles in history, and her weapons still tell that story with haunting clarity. The 1.1-inch quad mounts and the 20mm Oerlikon cannons remain at their stations, their barrels still tilted toward the surface, as if frozen in a permanent state of defiance against an enemy that has long since vanished. In one of the most chilling images captured by the expedition, a projectile remains seated in the fuse setter next to a 5-inch gun. It is a terrifyingly intimate glimpse into the chaos of October 1942. A sailor was likely standing right there preparing that shell for the next wave of dive bombers when the final order to abandon ship was given. The metalwork, the ladders, and even the electrical conduits look remarkably intact, lacking the jagged, weeping rusticles that usually consume ships like the Titanic. Moving higher up the structure, the island reveals the unique, rounded architectural lines that distinguish the Hornet from her older sisters. Perched atop the tower, the ship's signal horn remains firmly bolted in its mount, still covered in its original coat of navy paint. It is an eerie sight that makes you feel as if you could reach through the screen, pull the cord, and hear a ghostly blast echo through the deep. But perhaps the most surreal and humanizing image of all is a simple bulkhead, where the ship's internal structure was torn open. Caught in the jagged metal is a standard-issue sailor's coat. After 7 decades submerged in the crushing pressure and freezing cold, the fabric appears so well preserved that you feel as if you could pull it out, dry it off, and wear it today. Everywhere the cameras turned, they found evidence of a world that had been hermetically sealed. From the red coloration still visible on the fire hoses to the intact glass in the bridge windows, the Hornet is less a wreck and more a time capsule. She is a silent steel cathedral preserving the final moments of a generation. Looking at these images, you realize you aren't just looking at the remains of a naval vessel. You are looking at a moment in history that has been captured and held in place by the sheer weight of the ocean, waiting for us to finally bear witness to the incredible resilience of both the machine and the men who served aboard her. As the ROV glides away from the battle-scarred exterior and maneuvers toward the gaping, shadows-drenched openings of the hangar deck, the story of the Hornet takes an even more intimate turn. Moving inside the belly of a sunken carrier is always a high-risk operation, a journey into a pressurized tomb where the ghosts of the past feel almost close enough to touch. But as the powerful LED arrays of the drone cut through the silt-heavy darkness of the hangar, they landed on a site that has since become the most iconic image of the entire expedition. There, sitting upright and defiant against the weight of the abyss, is a yellow International Harvester aircraft tug. It is a jarring, surreal vision. In the middle of a massive warship that was pounded by the combined might of an imperial navy, this small, humble piece of industrial machinery stands in near-perfect condition. The preservation is so absolute that it defies logic. The rubber on the tires, a material that should have perished or become brittle decades ago, appears completely intact, still holding its shape, despite the nearly 8,000 pounds of pressure pressing down on every square inch. Most incredible of all is the branding. The name International Harvester is emblazoned across the front in white paint that remains as crisp and bright as the day it left a factory in the American Midwest. It is a piece of Americana, a symbol of the arsenal of democracy, resting 3 miles deep in the South Pacific. Looking at this tug, you can almost hear the industrial roar of the hangar deck in 1942. You can imagine the young sailors barely out of high school revving this engine to move Wildcat fighters and Dauntless dive bombers into position for the Doolittle raid. There is a steering wheel still in place, a seat that looks like you could sit in it today, and even a heavy chain hanging suspended in the water just inches from the front grille. The chain is frozen in a silent, gravity-defying pose, a testament to the absolute stillness of the deep-sea environment. This wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a tool of daily labor, and seeing it so well preserved bridges the gap between the legend of the Hornet and the lived reality of the men who walked these decks. The tug serves as a profound reminder of the time capsule effect that the deep ocean can provide. While the exterior of the ship shows the violence of torpedoes and the ravages of a 3-mile fall, the interior hangar deck shielded from the worst of the currents, and the impact has remained a sanctuary. One can't help but wonder what else lies just beyond the reach of the ROV's lights. Are there more planes, their wings folded and their cockpits intact? Are there more lockers, more tools, or perhaps more of those personal items that tell the human side of the war? The International Harvester tug has become the silent ambassador of the USS Hornet. It represents the intersection of extraordinary history and ordinary life. It is quite possibly the best preserved piece of equipment on any deep water wreck in the world. As the ROV slowly backs away, leaving the tug to its eternal watch in the dark, the image lingers in the mind, a bright mechanical ghost of 1940s America, waiting in a silent hangar for a mission that ended a lifetime ago. The story of the USS Hornet is not merely a tale of steel and sonar. It is a story of the men who lived, fought, and in some cases, died within her hulls. When the RV Petrol team went public with their discovery, they reached out to a man who knew the ship better than any historian, Richard Nowatzki. At 95 years old, Nowatzki was one of the last living links to the CV-8. Watching the high-definition footage of his 5-inch gun mount positioned right near the jagged break, where the stern snapped off, was more than a technical briefing. It was a reunion across time. With the characteristic grit and wit of a greatest generation sailor, he joked that if the ROV found his locker, the crew could keep the $40 he'd left inside. But behind the humor was a profound sense of peace. For him and his surviving shipmates, the Hornet wasn't just a wreck. It was a home they had been forced to leave behind in a sea of fire. This human connection is what truly defines the Hornet's legacy. Beyond the massive guns and the towering island, the ROV's cameras captured small, heart-wrenching glimpses of a life interrupted. In the debris field, the lights fell upon a wash kit resting in the silt with a toothbrush still lying exactly where it fell more than 3/4 of a century ago. These are the humanizing touches that transform a shipwreck into a memorial. They remind us that this massive vessel was a floating city of thousands of young men, most of whom were barely out of their teens. every shell hole in her side, remnants of the 400 rounds fired by American destroyers in a desperate final attempt to scuttle her, tells the story of a ship that refused to die, even when her own side tried to send her down to prevent her capture by the enemy. Today, the Hornet remains one of the most protected sites on Earth, guarded not by patrols, but by the sheer crushing weight of the Pacific. Following a strict ethical protocol, Vulcan Inquiris and the RV Petrel team have never disclosed her exact coordinates to the public. This secrecy is a deliberate act of reverence, ensuring that the ship is protected from the tragic fate of other WWII wrecks in shallower Indonesian waters, which have been illegally scavenged for scrap metal. At 17,500 feet, the Hornet is far beyond the reach of looters. She is a sovereign territory of the United States and a hallowed war grave, resting in a place where the water is as still as a tomb and the oxygen is too thin for the passage of time to erase her. The USS Hornet began her journey as the daring platform for the Doolittle raid, a symbol of American resolve when the world was at its darkest. Now she rests as a silent sentinel in the deep, her camouflage still vivid, her guns still pointed skyward, and her name still visible on the steel. She is a bridge across generations, a remarkably preserved testament to a moment in time when the fate of the world hung in the balance. As we leave her there in the cold, dark embrace of the abyss, we do so with the knowledge that the Doolittle Raider has finally been rediscovered. She remains a ghost of the Pacific, an eternal monument to the price of freedom, standing watch in the silent deep for as long as the ocean exists.